Today is Tuesday, Parashah Tazria. Many times we find a connection between the end of last week's Parashah to the theme of this week's Parashah. And last week's Parashah, we concluded the Parashah with the laws of Kashrut. What animals you're allowed to eat, what the fish you're allowed to eat, fish that has scales and fins, animals that have split hoofs and chew their cud, the birds that we're not allowed to eat. So he spoke all about laws of kashrut, things that we're allowed to put in our mouth. Parashah of this week, the greatest majority of it has to do with the sin, or rather with tzara'at. Tzara'at is a physical ailment, leprosy for lack of a better word in English. It's a kind of affliction that could happen either on the skin of a person, sometimes even on his clothing, or on some discoloration, and even on the walls of his house. But the idea is, why does a person get this leprosy, which is actually causes a certain ritual impurity, a certain tum'ah? Why does this person get punished with the leprosy, with tzara'at? And Hachamim explain one of the main reasons is because of lashon hara. And that's why metzora, which means someone who has leprosy, is Rashi Tevot Motzi Shem Ra, one who gives a bad reputation to another person. So if the end of last week's parashah spoke about we're allowed to put in the mouth to eat, the parashah of this week tells us about tzara'at, which is a result of improper speech, words that come out of our mouth. So whether what comes in our mouth, we have to be careful. We have to be even very careful with what comes out of our mouth. And unfortunately, there are very many people who may be very careful about what types of food they eat. They will never eat non-kosher food. They will be very careful to eat only food that is kosher. Yet, you might find them speaking words of lashon hara, speaking evil about others, speaking words of deceit, speaking words that are improper. And while they were careful with what goes into their mouth, they were not careful about what goes out of their mouth. And the parashah of this week, by following the rules of kashrut, indicates to us a very important principle, that one should be careful not just of what goes into his mouth, but also what comes out of his mouth. And Shlomo HaMelech speaks about a great effort and challenge that a person has to do. Amal ha'adam lefiu, the effort of a person should be about his mouth, to be careful with what he says and not to say words that could be understood as negative about other people, even when it's true. You have to refrain from saying negative statements about another person. I mean, there are situations where you're obligated to say, to avoid someone from being cheated, let's say. That would be an occasion where you would have to speak. But typically, the less you say, the better it is. And that's the reason why there's a connection between the end of last week's parashah and the theme of this week's parashah. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.